here's the name of the article. Evidence Noah's Biblical Flood Happened. Yeah, you should say, wow, that's awesome. This is a secular source. Science, and here's a quote, science, from ABC News, has found evidence for a massive deluge that about 7,500 years ago, a flood poured 10 cubic miles of water a day, 130 times more than flows over Niagara Falls, from the Mediterranean Sea into the Black Sea, abruptly turning the formerly freshwater lake into a brackish inland sea. ABC News. And then it goes on to say, this article, furthermore, over the entire sea bottom was a thin, uniform layer of sediment that could only have been deposited during a flood dating from around 7,600 years ago. But you don't hear about this in the scientific community today. Now, if ABC News isn't good enough for you, consider what the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill published regarding fossils and the vast fossil record that we have. How many know what a fossil is? How many are sitting next to a fossil right now? If you have a high school education, you've learned about fossils. You've been taught by evolution that fossils prove evolution. That's what we've all been taught. But actually, I want you to realize that fossils don't prove evolution. Fossils actually prove the flood of Genesis. What is a fossil? A fossil is the remains or an impression of a prehistoric organism preserved in petrified form as a mold or a cast in a rock. That's a fossil, right? Now today, when an animal dies, it's on the side of the road. You know what happens. It's there on the side of the road, or it's out in the woods, or in your backyard, or whatever. It turns into a fossil, right? That was a trick question. It does not turn into a fossil. Absolutely not. What happens to animals or plants when they die in the forest? They're either eaten, scavenged, or they decay. Fossils do not typically develop. They do not it only occurs if there is some event that actually buries that organism in sediments, puts pressure upon it, and preserves their bodily form. Today, fossils only occur when there's like an avalanche or there's a volcanic eruption that encases the animal in a sort of cast. Now today, there are millions and millions of fossils in the earth. Millions of them. And the fact, and let me say this again, for a fossil to develop, it requires rapid burial in sediments thick enough to preserve their bodily form and huge amounts of pressure. That's how a fossil is formed. And the fact that there exist millions of fossils today, plants, animals, fish, proves that there was an immediate cataclysmic event that buried millions and millions of animals and fish and plants, buried them in sediment, pressurized them, and preserved them. Now, evolutionists will say, well, fossils are evidence of billions of years of buildup and sediment, over top of these animals that died. No, it doesn't work that way. They would just decay and disappear. What's required is something cataclysmic, something immediate, right? And evolutionists, they look at fossils because they've removed God from the equation. And they throw the Bible out the window. They don't dare say, well, maybe there is something to this flood thing. No, they say, no, it can't be a flood. It's got to be billions and billions of years and buildup of sediment that's put pressure on them. But if you believe the Bible and you believe in God, this is not hard to figure out. When you see that there are millions and millions of fossils all throughout the earth, it's clear to us what the solution is. God's word is true. There was a worldwide flood that covered the earth, and millions of animals and fish and plants were buried under mud and sand and rock, and they were pressurized, and they were hardened like concrete, and there are great layers of fossil rocks today because of not billions of years of evolution, but because of the flood. Now, you don't hear this in high school geology. You don't hear about this in grade school science. You don't hear about these things because God is not supposed to be talked about there. It doesn't stop there. Other research from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill says that one of the most obvious indications of a catastrophic water event is the vast amount of fossil graveyards that exist in sedimentary layers around the world. How many are with me today? Still with me? Yes? You learning something? Stay with me now, okay? Don't drift off. Stop thinking about bagels out in the lobby now. Okay? Bagel time is over, all right? This is the time where we endure sound doctrine and get deep. Amen? Okay? The vast amount of fossil graveyards. What does that mean, a fossil graveyard? That's talking about entire species of animals and groups of animals that are found in fossil graveyards. Great collections of fossils. As though something came up and picked up an entire herd and moved them to this area, and they all became buried and encased at the same time. And these are all around the world, these fossil graveyards, where it suggests that entire groupings of species were picked up by some current and were deposited in some place at the exact same time, and then they were buried rapidly by mud and clay and sand and compacted down. All around the world we see this. There are great dinosaur beds excavated in New Mexico, Tanzania, Belgium, hippopotamus beds in Sicily, amphibian beds in Texas, mastodons in Florida, horse beds in France, beds of shells, of seashells and aquatic marine life, all over in mountains. In the state of Michigan, listen to this, in the state of Michigan, fossilized skeletons of 2 whales were discovered in Michigan. Whales just hanging out in Detroit. Can you imagine that? Other fossils of whales have been found, listen to this, fossils of whales that have been found 440 feet above sea level north of Lake Ontario. Did you get that? Fossils of whales discovered 440 feet above sea level. How'd they get there? Well, they just out mountain climbing one day? Another skeleton of another whale was discovered in Vermont, more than 500 feet above sea level. Another skeleton of a whale was found in the Montreal, Quebec area, about 600 feet above sea level. How did they get there? Well, if you don't believe in God, that's a hard one to answer. I don't know, maybe billions of years in the Ice Age. I don't know, maybe some upheaval of tectonic plates or something. I don't know. But if you believe in God and you believe in the Word of God, the answer is very simple. There was a flood. And it picked them up. And it carried them. And when the waters receded, poor whales were left on the top of the mountain. Marine fossils in mountains all over the world. You can find seashells in mountains. What's that about? Other marine fossils in the Sierras, in the Swiss Alps, in the Himalayas, many other places. In fact, there was an author, his name is John Horner. He wrote a book. The book was called Digging Dinosaurs. Now, you may not know who John Horner is, but he's one of the best-known paleontologists in the U.S. In fact, he served as the technical advisor for all the Jurassic Park films. Oh yeah, John Horner. Now I know. In fact, this guy, John Horner, was the inspiration for the lead character in Jurassic Park, right? Remember Alan Grant? Remember that name? Boy, movie boss? Right? Okay. Anyway, this is what he wrote in his book, Digging Dinosaurs. In addition to 30 million fossil fragments, we have discovered the tomb of 10,000 dinosaurs. There was a flood. That's what he wrote. This was no ordinary spring flood from one of the streams in the area, but a catastrophic inundation. That's our best explanation. It seems to make the most sense. And on the basis of it, we believe that this was a living, breathing group of dinosaurs destroyed in one catastrophic moment. This is from secular sources, saying, yes, there had to have been a flood. It's the only explanation that we have for these fossil graveyards. More evidence comes from fallacies in the geologic column. How many remember the geologic column? Sure, Pastor Gregg, I was just reading about it this morning. geologic column, you may remember about that, right? In high school science, right? Or in grade school, or even in college, right? Fallacies in the geologic column. The geologic column is a construct of evolution in which you take a cross-section of the Earth's crust, and the supposition there is that you will see successive cycles of evolution in the fossil record in this cross-section of the Earth's crust. On the bottom, you should see 100 billion-year-old microbes. A little higher up, you'll see 50 billion-year-old fish. A little higher up, you should see 1 billion-year-old vertebrates, and then 100 million-year-old, and then 10 million-year-old, like that. Okay? The only problem with the geologic column is that it exists nowhere in the world. That this universal, this sequential ordering of evolutionary species does not exist. It is another theory. It's a theory. In fact, what we have, instead of a universal ordering, is we have some random, kind of confused upheaval of all kinds of species every which way. Now, the evolutionists will say, well, it's the moving of tectonic plates, and it's earthquakes shifting, and things being juxtaposed here and there. But I want you to look at what Dr. Henry Morris, he's the professor, or was the professor of civil engineering at Virginia Tech. He's the founder of the Creation Research Institute and author of over 20 books on creation theory. And I recommend any of his books. If you've not read any of Henry Morris's stuff, you need to get to it and read and study. He wrote this in the book Science and Bible. Quote, "The geologic column, instead of revealing the vast evolutionary ages of geology, actually is the record of just one event, the flood. It does not represent the billions of years of evolution of life over the many ages, but the cataclysmic destruction of life in one age." He goes on to write, "This can only mean that the worldwide sedimentary column was formed rapidly and contemporaneously, exactly as in the Noahic flood recorded in the Bible." Hallelujah. But science won't tell us these things. Evolution will not tell us these things. You've got to go to people who have a biblical worldview and a belief in God to get the truth. That's not all. There's incredible evidence from anthropology. How many know what anthropology is? Study of the history of man. Practically every culture and every nation have stories of cataclysmic floods. It's a part of our history as human beings. It's a part of our history.